The life sentence handed down to the son of Rick Harrison, the famed star of the reality TV show Pawn Stars, has shocked the public and raised serious questions about the darker side behind the glitz and glamour of television fame. Once known to the public as part of the iconic pawnshop family featured on American television, the downfall of a key member of the Harrison family has not only tarnished their reputation, but also exposed the conflicts, secrets, and hidden cracks within a seemingly unshakable empire. From a symbol of success and sharp business acumen, the Harrison name is now associated with scandal, crime, and a betrayal of the trust of millions of viewers. If you believe this story matters and want to be part of the conversation about accountability and ethics in the entertainment industry, don't forget to hit like and share this post. Your small action can help raise public awareness and call for greater transparency and responsibility, not just from producers but also from the fans themselves. At 41, Cory Harrison was once a charming and approachable figure, a familiar face on American television. His interactions with customers and down-to-earth personality made him a fan favorite. He was once the embodiment of the American dream, working hard in the family business, rising through the ranks and achieving fame. But behind that friendly face lies a different story, one of criminal activities that went far beyond the pawnshop walls. The business that brought this family into the spotlight has been hiding a dark secret they tried desperately to keep buried. However, once the FBI got involved, the truth could no longer be ignored. For months, federal agents quietly gathered pieces of evidence. They uncovered that Rick Harrison, the head of the family, had been accused of participating in a series of illegal activities. From money laundering to human trafficking, these allegations completely shattered the carefully crafted image of the Harrison family. Once seen as legitimate, hard-working entrepreneurs, their reputation crumbled overnight. The most shocking revelation: Cory Harrison wasn't just a bystander. He was a key figure in the criminal network. He helped build an empire not only based on antiques, but also on crime. As the investigation widened, the public's fascination with the Harrison family took a dark turn. Pawn Stars fans watched in shock as their once-beloved heroes became entangled in a massive criminal conspiracy. The case spanned multiple states, linking the family to an underground world of crime few could have imagined. Cory's role became increasingly clear as witness testimonies and mounting evidence stacked up against him. Testimonies and financial records revealed that he was directly involved in illegal transactions, many of which were carried out through the pawn shop, which served as a front for criminal activity. Then came the bombshell moment. The FBI raided Rick Harrison's multi-million-dollar mansion in Las Vegas. Authorities seized encrypted devices and financial documents that connected the Harrison family to a criminal network. As the investigation continued, it became increasingly clear that the empire they had built was more than just a family business. It was a front for a wide range of illegal operations, meticulously organized and carefully hidden. The scandal sent shockwaves through communities across the country. How could the man behind Pawn Stars, a show watched by millions every week, be connected to such a criminal network? Cory, who had spent years in the spotlight, now faces the consequences of his own actions. The evidence against him was undeniable, from the FBI raid to witness testimonies. Financial documents traced illegal transactions directly to his name. Encrypted devices further linked him to organized crime networks. In court, Cory Harrison was charged with conspiring with his father to run a criminal empire. The trial played out like a high-stakes crime thriller. As the defense struggled to build a credible case against the growing mountain of evidence, it became clear that Cory wasn't just a pawn in his father's game. He was a key player. He was an integral part of the entire operation. The prosecution painted a damning picture of his deep involvement. However, as the trial unfolded, the public began to ask, what led Cory down this dark path? Was he a willing participant, driven by greed and the lure of easy money? Or was it Rick Harrison who pulled him in, trapping him in a web of deception and manipulation that spanned years? The question of Cory's guilt grew more complex with each passing day of the trial. And the answer seemed to lie deep within the tangled dynamics of the Harrison family. In the end, the jury delivered a harsh verdict. Cory Harrison was found guilty on multiple counts related to his role in the family's criminal empire. The court sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The man who was once a beloved television star now faces the harshest consequences for his actions. The sentence marked a dramatic turning point in the saga of the Harrison family. What was once seen as a symbol of success and American culture has now become a cautionary tale about greed, fame, and hidden secrets. Fans who once cheered for Cory now find themselves asking, how could someone once trusted be involved in such a dark underground world? The next question continues to surface. How much did Rick Harrison really know? Was he the mastermind, with Cory merely suffering the consequences? As news of the verdict spread, the public reacted strongly and without mercy. Fans were shocked by the truth, feeling betrayed by the family they once idolized. On social media, a flood of comments poured in from viewers who couldn't believe it. They struggled to reconcile the image of hard-working entrepreneurs with the reality of a sophisticated criminal empire. Many wondered how they could have been deceived for so long. This collapse was not only a tragedy for a family, but also a wake-up call about the fragility of reputation and the cost of the truth. The story of Cory Harrison's conviction serves as a profound warning. It shows just how thin the line is between public perception and personal guilt. The consequences of wrong choices and the darker side of fame are sometimes unpredictable, but it's also a story of lost redemption. A man who once had everything, only to lose it all because of the very empire that had lifted him up. Cory Harrison's fall is filled with painful irony. The empire he helped build is also the place that buried his future. That empire was built from small transactions, from success carefully accumulated piece by piece. But in a world where fame and fortune are fleeting, just one moment in the spotlight is enough to change a destiny forever. At the heart of that empire is Rick Harrison, the father, the founder, the leader, and perhaps the one who pulled the entire family into the darkness. He made a name for himself as the quick-witted, charismatic owner of Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, the central star of the hit show Pawn Stars on the History Channel. The television show Pawn Stars, which premiered in 2009, became an overnight success. It turned a small pawn shop in Las Vegas into a global brand. Fans worldwide followed the daily hustle of Rick, Cory, and their team as they explored the world of rare antiques, classic memorabilia, and historical artifacts. But behind the camera lens, a much darker operation was unfolding, one that would lead to the collapse of the Harrison family empire. Rick Harrison's path to success was not paved with gold. In fact, it was far from the lavish lifestyle he would one day come to live. Born in Lexington, North Carolina, Rick was no stranger to hardship. His father was a soldier, so the family frequently moved. When Rick was a teenager, he found himself living in Las Vegas. It was here that Rick began working in the pawn industry, learning the basics of buying, selling, and appraising items. He quickly saw an opportunity to open his own pawn shop. By 1989, he made that dream a reality. The real turning point for Rick came in 2009 when Pawn Stars premiered on the History Channel. The show immediately captivated the public's imagination with its unique blend of history, human interest, and treasure hunting. From a small pawn shop, Rick turned his business into a household name. Suddenly, he became a star in his own television series. Alongside him was his son Cory, who had worked at the pawn shop for many years. Although Cory was often portrayed as the straightforward man, occasionally clashing with his father's witty remarks, it was clear he had inherited Rick's business acumen and personality. The family-friendly image of Pawn Stars painted a picture of a legitimate, hard-working business, a father-son duo who built an empire from the ground up. However, what the audience didn't see behind the camera was a much darker world. As Pawn Stars' success soared, so did Rick Harrison's wealth and influence. The man who once struggled to make a living now lives in a sprawling mansion in the most upscale area of Las Vegas. Cory also became more powerful than ever. He was no longer just the son of a star. He had become a key figure in the family business, managing operations and making deals that helped propel the success of the show. However, as Cory's role grew, so did the influence of shady figures in the Harrison family's life. Along with the growing fame of the pawn shop, they became involved in larger, more lucrative deals, from rare artifacts and historical items to dealings with celebrities. Memorabilia, art, artifacts, they handled transactions worth millions of dollars. The pawn business, once operating quietly, had now become the center of attention. It attracted not only legitimate customers, but also those looking to exploit the business for illegal purposes. The allure of easy money proved too strong for many. It was during this time that the connection between Rick, Cory, and criminal organizations began to form. As the business grew, their deals became more complicated. The line between legitimate business and illegal activity started to blur. Soon after, the FBI began to take notice of the Harrison family. As early as 2012, law enforcement quietly launched an investigation. Suspicion centered around money laundering and the trafficking of stolen goods. It took a long time, but once enough evidence had been gathered, the true scale of the operation became clear. The pawn shop was now suspected of being a front for underground activities. They were believed to be working with organized crime networks, trading everything from stolen artwork to illegal weapons. The pawn shop, once a place for exchanging valuable goods, had now become a mask for criminal activity. Cory, who once relished fame, was now caught up in a dangerous web. A dark network threatened to engulf both him and his family. Despite growing suspicions, the Harrison family continued to maintain their legal facade. The public still saw Rick and Cory as symbols of hard work and determination. However, behind that image lay a much more complex and darker truth. They were the center of a criminal organization far larger than a mere pawn shop. The Harrison family was accused of working with organized criminals. They were suspected of laundering money through high-value transactions. Not only that, but they were also believed to be facilitating the interstate transportation of stolen goods. The glitz of reality television was just a facade. Cory Harrison, once beloved on television, was now caught in the middle of it all. The investigation deepened, and evidence began pointing toward Cory. He was identified as playing a central role in managing the illegal transactions. While Rick Harrison was the face of the operation, Cory was the one coordinating behind the scenes. He acted as the bridge between the criminal organization and the pawn shop. Individuals involved in shady activities frequently visited the shop. The deeper the FBI investigated, the clearer it became. The Harrison empire was built on more than just antiques. Behind the rare items was a network of risky, illegal transactions. Not only Rick, but Cory was also deeply involved in the criminal activities. The father and son duo, once seen as the ideal role models on television, were now at the center of a scandal. The reputation that once brought them success had now become a fatal blow. The very work that made them famous was now turning around to destroy them from within. Cory Harrison, the character who once captured the public's heart, was no longer the golden boy. He had become an accomplice in a criminal organization with far-reaching influence. His role was no longer that of an assistant. He was a direct participant, making decisions. And those secrets were about to be exposed in the most dramatic way. As the Harrison family's fame and wealth continued to spread, the suspicions grew larger with it. What started as a small pawn shop in Las Vegas, built on Rick Harrison and his family's dreams, had grown into a multi-million-dollar business. However, with the rise in wealth and influence, the inevitable attention of law enforcement began to surface. The FBI, always vigilant of illegal activities hidden behind the facade of legitimate business, began focusing on the Pawn Stars empire. What they uncovered over the course of 16 months was nothing short of shocking. The FBI's investigation into the Harrison family's pawn shop was initially triggered by a routine audit. Suspicious financial transactions within the business had caught the attention of investigators. What initially appeared to be harmless transactions involving antiques and collectibles soon became a major concern. On the surface, Pawn Stars was just a reality TV show, capturing the thrill of bargaining over rare items and priceless artifacts. But beneath that shiny exterior lay a network of criminal activity that the public knew nothing about. The investigation began quietly, with federal agents discreetly combing through the financial records of the gold and silver pawn shop. At first, they were only looking into simple allegations of money laundering and the sale of stolen goods. However, as the investigation deepened, its scope began to expand far beyond what was initially anticipated. New clues kept emerging, indicating the pawn shop's involvement in shady activities. An underground world began to surface beneath the glossy exterior of a globally renowned brand. What started as an investigation into financial activities quickly turned into a full-blown probe into organized crime. Agents discovered that the pawn shop seemed to have become a hub for numerous illegal transactions. One of the first pieces of evidence that drew the FBI's attention was a series of unusually large cash transactions. These sums of money were deposited into the shop's accounts, but there was no accompanying paperwork. In the pawn industry, cash transactions are not uncommon, but the amounts involved in these deals far exceeded the actual value of the items. The discrepancies raised significant questions for the investigators. They found that it wasn't just small items, but even goods worth hundreds of thousands of dollars were not properly documented. Additionally, many transactions were carried out without official paperwork or receipts. This violated key financial regulations and federal laws. Some high-value items were confirmed to have been moved across state lines without the proper records. Many of these items also lacked clear provenance, raising suspicions that they were stolen goods. The FBI concluded that these weren't mere business oversights, but could be intentional efforts to conceal illegal activities. The lack of transparency in the accounting records indicated systematic financial manipulation. These findings elevated the investigation to a new level, involving multiple federal and local agencies. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the transactions were not the result of poor accounting or simple mistakes. The FBI began to piece together a larger, more organized picture. They discovered that Rick Harrison had facilitated transactions with individuals linked to organized crime, including money laundering and arms trafficking networks. The pawn shop had become a front for illegal transactions. Rick, whether knowingly or unknowingly, played the role of an intermediary in this criminal network. As evidence piled up, the investigation shifted focus to Cory Harrison. Cory, who was increasingly taking on a larger role in the family business, began to emerge as a central figure. As the pawn shop grew, Cory's influence over the operations became more prominent. While Rick was the face of the TV show, Cory was the one actually running things behind the scenes. Federal agents discovered that Cory was deeply involved in managing and executing shady transactions. This included coordinating with criminal organizations to carry out illegal transactions. Clearly, Cory was not just an heir, he was an active part of the criminal network. The situation became more serious when a new twist emerged in the investigation. The FBI discovered evidence of human trafficking linked to the gold and silver pawn shop. Tracing the flow of money, agents found that the shop was being used as a payment hub for stolen goods. Even more concerning, some of the payments were tied to human trafficking operations across state lines. This discovery shocked the investigators, increasing the urgency of the case. For months, the FBI quietly built a case against the Harrison family. They conducted secret surveillance, recorded conversations, analyzed data, and tracked communications. What they gathered was not only concerning, but also pivotal. Agents discovered encrypted emails and messages detailing secret transactions. The content revealed links between the Harrison family and major criminal organizations across the country. The pawn shop had been used as a tool for money laundering, trafficking stolen goods, and facilitating human trafficking. One of the most surprising findings was the role of the employees within the system. Although most employees were loyal to the Harrisons, some began to notice unusual activities. They witnessed strange transactions involving expensive items with unclear origins. From unexplained cash exchanges to untraceable goods, a few employees began questioning the transparency of the business. Some of them became whistleblowers, providing confidential information to the FBI. As a result, investigators gained a clearer picture of what was happening behind the store's doors. Despite being under surveillance, the Harrison family continued to maintain the appearance that nothing was amiss. They continued filming episodes of Pawn Stars, appearing on television as energetic father and son figures. But beneath the spotlight, the FBI was steadily building its case. New connections kept emerging, making the investigation more complex. The deeper they dug, the clearer the links between the Harrisons and the criminal underworld became. The Harrisons had become so entangled with criminal organizations that they were inseparable. They weren't just unwitting accomplices, they were directly involved in facilitating illegal activities. For months, the FBI was in a race against time to prevent the destruction of evidence. Finally, after all the pieces came together, they were ready to act. The time had come when the FBI realized the full extent of the Harrison family's criminal activities. They were believed to be behind one of the largest money laundering schemes in Las Vegas history, and it was all cleverly disguised under the guise of a famous pawn shop. The Harrisons had moved millions of dollars through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. This revelation shook the investigation, and it became clear that the Harrison empire was built not only on hard work, but also on corruption and crime. With this crucial information in hand, the FBI was ready to make an arrest. The investigation had reached its climax, and it was time for the Harrisons to face the consequences of their actions. The FBI's investigation into Rick Harrison's pawn shop and the illegal empire it concealed reached a pivotal moment in the summer of 2025. After months of secret surveillance, financial tracking, and witness testimony, authorities were led to a decisive point. They executed a high-profile raid on Rick Harrison's multi-million-dollar mansion in Las Vegas. It was a dramatic scene that would ultimately expose the entire criminal operation of the family and shake the public's trust in their beloved Pawn Stars star. Rick Harrison's mansion was not just a residence, but a symbol of the success and empire he had built. Located in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Las Vegas, the sprawling estate was a complete architectural marvel with luxurious, refined details. The vast grounds and panoramic views of the city reflected the American dream, showcasing hard work, determination, and the success that had been achieved. But for the FBI, it had become a symbol of something far darker, the heart of a criminal empire. For months, federal agents had been gathering intelligence and compiling evidence against the Harrison family. They had tapped into financial records, analyzed encrypted communications, and even conducted undercover operations to uncover the vast criminal network surrounding the gold and silver pawn shop. What they uncovered shocked the pawn shop. A business that seemed legitimate had been used as a front for money laundering, trafficking stolen goods, and even human trafficking. Rick Harrison, Cory Harrison, and others involved had become deeply entangled in these criminal activities, facilitating transactions that spanned across states and were linked to organized crime syndicates. The raid on Rick Harrison's mansion was the moment the FBI had been waiting for. Armed with a search warrant, surveillance footage, and a wealth of evidence, the agents were ready to strike. They knew they needed the evidence to convict Harrison, his family members, and their criminal accomplices who were hiding within the walls of that mansion. It was the headquarters of a criminal network that had been operating secretly for a long time. On the morning of the raid, FBI agents stormed the mansion with military precision. It was still early, and the house was quiet, but the operation was anything but subtle. The agents surrounded the house, blocking all exits and cutting off any possible escape routes. The team, which included armed SWAT members, had planned the operation down to the smallest detail, knowing that any mistake could lead to the destruction of crucial evidence or even violence. The Harrison family was very famous, and it was unclear how they would react to the confrontation. When the agents stormed the mansion, they saw the sprawling, lavish estate that the public had imagined. However, it was the basement and private offices that would prove to be the key to unlocking the entire criminal operation of the Harrison family. In the secluded areas of the mansion, hidden behind expensive walls, luxurious furniture, and decorations, the FBI discovered a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. Among the first items recovered were encrypted devices, laptops, hard drives, and smartphones that Rick and Cory Harrison had used to conduct their illegal transactions. These devices contained financial records, emails, and transaction histories directly linking the Harrison family to criminal organizations. The agents also discovered a stash of documents detailing secret deals and business transactions involving millions of dollars in cash. It was clear that these were not just simple pawn shop transactions, but complex money laundering schemes stretching across borders and continents. Perhaps the most shocking discovery came in a locked room beneath the mansion's wine cellar. Inside this secret room, FBI agents found stacks of documents, some detailing human trafficking activities. Some of the documents related to the transportation of illegal goods, while others pointed to dark transactions involving missing persons under mysterious circumstances. The FBI quickly realized that Rick and Cory Harrison were not just facilitators of financial transactions. They were also part of a larger, organized network spanning multiple criminal enterprises. These records were crucial, as they revealed the extent of the Harrisons' involvement in illegal activities, including links to international arms dealers and organized crime families. The pawnbroker family had built a public image based on historical transactions. Now, it had been exposed as an integral part of a much darker and more deadly world. The raid didn't stop at the mansion itself. FBI agents simultaneously conducted searches at several other properties linked to the Harrisons, including storage units, other homes, and even businesses tied to their criminal activities. The investigation uncovered numerous fronts used to conceal their illegal transactions, and the agents were determined not to miss a single detail. The raids took place simultaneously to prevent any evidence from being destroyed, ensuring that the Harrison family would not escape the full force of the law. As the agents continued their search, they found evidence of the pawn shop's involvement in selling stolen artifacts and rare, valuable items. Many of these irreplaceable items had passed through the gold and silver pawn shop without any questions asked. Some of these items were believed to have been taken from private museum collections and even from individuals who had been tricked into selling their valuable possessions. The role of the pawnbroker in these activities was nothing short of alarming. The Harrisons built their empire not only through legal transactions, but also by exploiting the very customers they once served. News of the raid quickly spread, sending shockwaves through the Pawn Stars fan community. The public, who had followed the Harrisons for years as they interacted with customers, haggled over deals, and shared the excitement of discovering rare treasures, now found that the very business that made them stars was under investigation for being involved in some of the most heinous crimes viewers could imagine. People who once admired the Harrisons for their wit and sharp business acumen were now grappling with the horrifying truth that the family they trusted were not the legitimate entrepreneurs they portrayed on television. By the end of the raid, the FBI had seized hundreds of pieces of evidence that would form the backbone of the criminal case against the Harrisons. These discoveries not only implicated Rick and Cory Harrison, but also cast a dark shadow over the entire Pawn Stars operation. For those who had spent years watching the show, it was impossible not to feel the utter disappointment as they reflected on the memories of the Harrison family. The public had been deceived, and the empire that once seemed untouchable was now being torn apart after the raid. Authorities quickly arrested Rick Harrison, Cory Harrison, and several associates, their names now synonymous with a criminal empire extending far beyond the pawnshop business. As the investigation continued, more details emerged about the scope of the Harrison family's illegal activities that were once praised for their sharp business sense and on-screen appeal. Now they were facing the harsh reality of their involvement in a criminal network that had cost them everything. As the investigation into the criminal activities of the Harrison family deepened, one bigger question loomed above all others. What role did Cory Harrison, Rick Harrison's once beloved son, play in the massive criminal empire that had operated under the guise of the gold and silver pawnshop for years? Cory was portrayed as a charming, down-to-earth character on Pawn Stars, someone viewers could relate to with his wit, straightforwardness, and humorous interactions with customers. This made him a fan favorite. If you believe that transparency and accountability in the entertainment industry matter, don't forget to hit like and share this post. Your actions will not only help spread awareness, but also send a strong message that we do not tolerate deception or compromise with wrongdoing. Join the conversation and help change the way reality television impacts society. A single like a share could be the first step in creating a more awake and proactive community in protecting ethical values. But behind the scenes, his actions were far from innocent. Cory Harrison began working in the family business at a young age, spending most of his life in the pawn shop, learning the ropes from his father, Rick, and becoming an essential part of the operation featured on the show. Cory was often seen as someone who could broker a deal or offer a fair price to customers looking to sell their valuable items. He was portrayed as having a keen eye for rare items and a talent for haggling. Over time, as the business grew, Cory's responsibilities began to blur the lines between legal and illegal activities. While Rick Harrison became the public face of the Pawn Stars empire, Cory's role within the business expanded along with the success of the show. More and more high-profile clients began visiting the Harrisons, and their reasons for coming went beyond just pawn transactions. Many of these clients had connections to organized crime, seeing the pawn shop as an opportunity to launder money, trade stolen goods, and carry out deals that could easily be hidden behind the legitimate transactions being filmed for the show. In this environment, Cory's deeper involvement in criminal activities began to take root. While his public image on the show portrayed him as an upright businessman, the reality was far more complex. Testimonies and evidence presented during the trial revealed that Cory played a key role in managing many of the illegal activities carried out through the pawn shop. He was not just Rick Harrison's son. He was a central figure in the criminal network that had used the business as a front for money laundering, trafficking in stolen goods, and, most shockingly, human trafficking. The FBI investigation revealed that Cory was the primary point of contact for several criminal organizations that used the pawn shop to facilitate their illegal activities. While Rick Harrison was often the public face of the business, it was Cory who handled the logistics behind the scenes. He was the one managing the transactions, ensuring that the money changed hands, and making sure that goods were moved without raising suspicion. His involvement in these transactions was not passive. Cory was an active participant, directing the movement of goods and money to conceal the criminal operations. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence linking Cory to the criminal activities came from the encrypted devices seized during the FBI raid. These devices contained communication logs, emails, and encrypted messages that directly implicated Cory in illegal transactions. The evidence painted a clear picture of Cory as the mastermind behind many of the unlawful activities occurring at the gold and silver pawn shop. The messages detailed negotiations with criminal organizations, instructions on how to handle large sums of illicit money, and even exchanges discussing the logistics of transporting stolen goods. The role of Cory in the family business went far beyond managing daily operations. As the store expanded, the scope of illegal transactions grew as well. One of the most shocking revelations was Cory's direct involvement in human trafficking. While Pawn Stars portrayed the store as a place for individuals to sell heirlooms or rare artifacts, in reality, it became a front for far more sinister activities. The FBI uncovered evidence showing Cory coordinated the sale of people as if they were items on a pawn ticket. It was revealed that he facilitated the trafficking of women and children for forced labor and sexual exploitation. This revelation sent shockwaves through the entire investigation. Cory, the son of a television celebrity and business mogul, was directly involved in crimes that destroyed the lives of his victims. Often vulnerable individuals, they had been lured into the orbit of pawn shops under the guise of legitimate transactions. Cory's involvement in these heinous crimes shattered any illusion of his innocence. The man once known for his humor and charm transformed into a villain in the eyes of the public. As the evidence was presented, the public image that the Harrison family had meticulously built over the years crumbled completely. The criminal activities they had engaged in were not merely personal acts, but part of a larger organized crime empire. The true nature of their actions was now revealed. Cory was a key player in a network of human exploitation and suffering. While Cory had once been an eager participant in his family's business, his deep involvement in these criminal activities painted a much darker picture. The evidence uncovered by the FBI made it clear that Cory had fully embraced the darker side of the illegal business. He chose personal gain over the values of integrity and honesty that he had once publicly championed. As the investigation progressed, it became evident that Cory had intentionally facilitated illegal transactions. He helped launder money and transport stolen goods. These actions turned Cory into a central figure in the criminal underworld. Cory's involvement went beyond merely handling transactions. He was also responsible for managing the shop's relationships with criminal clientele. These customers were not just individuals looking to sell their old jewelry, but people with ties to criminal organizations. They sought to use the pawn shop as a means of moving illicit goods and money. Cory acted as an intermediary between these criminals and the Harrison family business, providing them with a cover to carry out their shady activities. His participation went far beyond simple transactions. He became a key link in the criminal network. Cory had become a trusted figure in the underground criminal world. He was the bridge between the organized crime world and the public-facing pawn empire. The severity of Cory's actions became clearer during the trial. The evidence against him piled up, and it was nearly irrefutable. His role was not just that of a passive participant, but an active and willing accomplice. He had used his business acumen to further the interests of criminal organizations. While maintaining the facade of a responsible businessman, Cory had helped build a criminal empire. This criminal empire is slowly being exposed in court with each trial session. Cory's defense team struggled to provide a reasonable explanation for his actions. His illegal activities had been thoroughly documented, and there was almost no room left for doubt. The prosecution painted a damning picture of a man who not only deliberately violated the law, but did so for personal gain. As more evidence mounted, it became clear that Cory played a central role in the collapse of his family's empire. He would now have to face the consequences of his actions. The courtroom was packed as the trial of Cory Harrison officially began. Reporters, spectators, and members of the Harrison family were all in attendance. The public's interest in the case was understandable. Once beloved by millions for his friendly demeanor and witty sense of humor, Cory now stood before the court. As the heir to a famous pawn shop, he had once symbolized legacy and success. However, the dark side of the family business had led him to this harsh turning point. Now, he must face the full weight of the law. As the trial unfolded, the world was introduced to the shocking truth about Cory's involvement in illegal activities that led to the destruction of his family. The prosecution wasted no time in presenting their case against Cory, having gathered a vast amount of evidence. The weight of this evidence was made abundantly clear in their opening statements. The key to their argument was simple. Cory Harrison was an active participant in the criminal empire. He intentionally facilitated illegal transactions, coordinating with organized criminal groups. These activities had been taking place right under the public's nose for years. The prosecutors outlined the various criminal activities Cory had been involved in, from money laundering to trafficking in stolen goods. The most alarming accusation was the involvement in human trafficking. They presented the jury with convicting evidence, including encrypted messages, financial documents, and testimony from whistleblowers. Additionally, there were statements from law enforcement officers. The prosecution painted a picture of a man deeply embedded in the world of organized crime. Cory had used his position in the family business to facilitate and conceal illegal activities for years. One of the most critical pieces of evidence came from the testimony of federal agents who conducted the investigation. They detailed how they traced illegal money flows and goods through the Harrison family's pawn shop. The agents explained how they uncovered a network of organized crime that exploited the store as a front for money laundering and smuggling. Their testimony was compelling, describing how far Cory had gone to protect the business, even if it meant directly participating in criminal activities. These revelations left the jury stunned. Perhaps the most shocking testimony came from a whistleblower who had worked at the gold and silver pawn shop. A former loyal employee of the Harrison family shared first-hand accounts of witnessing illegal transactions behind closed doors. He described large sums of money being exchanged without any proper documentation, along with strange customers selling rare items. The employee recounted how unusual requests were made by Cory and Rick Harrison. Over time, he began to suspect something was wrong. Eventually, he contacted the FBI and provided crucial information that helped propel the investigation forward. The information provided by the whistleblower helped form the foundation of the case against Cory and his father. On the other hand, the defense struggled to present a credible strategy. They seemed to focus on discrediting the prosecution's witnesses and questioning the integrity of the investigation. The defense attorneys argued that Cory was unaware of the full extent of the criminal activities behind the scenes. They claimed that Cory was merely a pawn manipulated and controlled by his father, Rick Harrison. However, this argument lacked the weight to counter the overwhelming and clear evidence presented by the prosecution. As the trial continued, more details about the inner workings of the Harrison family's criminal enterprise came to light. The prosecution presented evidence of Cory's direct involvement in illegal transactions. They demonstrated that he had communicated and cooperated with organized crime syndicates. Furthermore, Cory was shown to have negotiated deals and even been present during the transfer of stolen goods. Everything was carried out under the guise of the pawnshop business. These pieces of evidence clearly indicated that Cory not only knew about the criminal activities, but was actively participating in them. One of the most crucial moments in the trial came when the prosecution presented a series of encrypted messages between Cory and one of the criminal organizations. These messages detailed the logistics of illegal transactions, including instructions on how to transfer large sums of money and items across state borders without arousing suspicion. The messages were clear and direct, showing that Cory was deeply involved in directing criminal activities. The prosecution used these communications to prove that Cory was not an innocent bystander. Instead, he was an active participant who fully understood and engaged in the illegal operations. This argument undermined the defense's claims, making their case seem increasingly weak. As the defense attempted to present their case, they sought to place much of the blame on Rick Harrison. Their argument suggested that Rick was the true mastermind behind the criminal empire, while Cory was merely manipulated into participating. They claimed that Rick had exploited his paternal influence to draw his son into these illegal activities. However, this argument quickly faltered in the face of overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution. The jury was not swayed by the defense's attempt to shift responsibility. It was clear that they viewed Cory as an active participant who was fully aware of his role in the crimes. He was no longer seen as the innocent heir many had once believed him to be. Throughout the trial, media coverage was intense and continuous. Journalists from across the United States flocked to Las Vegas to report on this shocking case. Pawn Stars, one of America's most beloved reality TV shows, was now the subject of widespread criticism. Fans who had once admired Cory for his friendly demeanor and practicality were now deeply disappointed. They could not fathom that the man they had watched on screen could be involved in such a criminal network. The case had turned into a real-life drama that captivated the entire nation. When the prosecution rested its case, the defense had little left to say. They failed to discredit the witnesses, and their attempt to paint Cory as a pawn in Rick's game convinced no one. Skepticism toward the defense's argument hung heavy in the courtroom. The evidence against Cory was overwhelming, especially the testimony from federal agents and the whistleblower. Together, they painted a damning picture. The final moments of the trial unfolded in a charged atmosphere. Both sides prepared for their closing arguments. The prosecution delivered a powerful closing statement. They emphasized the severity of Cory's actions and the harm he caused the community. According to them, Cory not only tarnished his family's reputation, but also directly contributed to the suffering of victims, particularly in human trafficking activities. The prosecution's message was clear. Cory Harrison must be held accountable under the law. He committed crimes, and now it was time to face the consequences. The jury began deliberating in a tense atmosphere. Clearly, Cory's fate was sealed. He was the central figure in one of the biggest criminal cases in Las Vegas in years. The evidence against him was too overwhelming to dispute. The question was no longer whether Cory was guilty, but how the justice system would deal with him. The courtroom fell into a suffocating silence as the jury returned to deliver their verdict. After days of trial, hours of testimony, and mountains of evidence, the moment of truth had finally arrived. All eyes turned to Cory Harrison. Cory Harrison, 41, son of Rick Harrison, the face of Pawn Stars, stood at the defendant's table with his fate hanging in the balance. The public once adored him as the affable heir to the famous pawn shop, but now they watched as he faced the consequences of his criminal actions. As the jury filed into the courtroom and took their seats, tension enveloped the room. All eyes fixed on Cory's stoic face and the team of lawyers beside him. The verdict would mark the end of a scandalous chapter in the Harrison family's history. The family members were anxiously awaiting the announcement for Cory. This was the moment that would shape the rest of his life. No turning back. The events of the past few weeks had now reached their climax. The judge, a stern figure who had presided over the entire trial, stood and addressed the room. She called for the jury to deliver their verdict. As she spoke, the air thickened with anticipation. The court clerk shouted, "We, the jury, find the defendant Cory Harrison guilty on all charges." The words echoed through the courtroom. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Cory stood motionless, his face expressionless, but the weight of the moment was clearly sinking in. His hands trembled slightly as he awaited what came next. The reality of what had transpired over the past months was finally undeniable. His involvement in a vast network of criminal enterprises had been confirmed. The public image he had so carefully crafted was now officially shattered. As the verdict was announced, the prosecution rose to deliver a statement on the severity of Cory's crimes. The prosecutor, who had led the case with unrelenting precision, began outlining the devastating consequences of Cory's actions. This defendant, the prosecutor declared, was not merely complicit in the crimes initiated by his father, but an active participant. The offenses included human trafficking, money laundering, and the distribution of stolen goods. Cory didn't just turn a blind eye, he orchestrated and profited from the crimes. Cory's actions had fueled a cycle of exploitation and corruption that spanned years. The prosecutor paused, letting the gravity of their words sink into the room's tense atmosphere. Once a television star, today he is a man who has destroyed not only his own life, but the lives of many others. The public's trust had been profoundly betrayed. Now, Cory faced the inevitable consequences. As the prosecutor concluded, justice must be served. There was no room for leniency. Cory's defense attorney sat in silence, with no arguments left to sway the outcome. All attempts to mitigate his responsibility had proven futile. They had once tried to paint Cory as a victim, coerced by his father into a web of deceit. But the prosecution's evidence had dismantled that narrative entirely. Cory Harrison was no passive bystander. He was fully aware and actively involved in the illegal activities conducted right at the family's pawn shop. The entire room now waited for him to speak. The room fell into complete silence as it was Cory's turn to speak. His defense attorney whispered something briefly, then Cory stepped forward. His face was solemn, his eyes subdued. In a voice barely above a whisper, Cory began, "I am deeply sorry for my actions. I never meant to hurt anyone, but I understand the consequences I've caused." He continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I wish I could undo the damage, but I know I can't. I have no excuses for my behavior." "I take full responsibility for my role in these crimes," Cory said, his voice choking. "I've let down my family, hurt my fans, and betrayed everyone who ever believed in me." He paused for a moment before concluding, "I've disappointed my father, and I'll live with that regret for the rest of my life. I beg for mercy, but I understand that justice must be served." The courtroom remained utterly silent. Cory's words seemed to hang in the air. But would his remorse change anything? The question lingered. Could that apology erase the profound betrayal he had caused? As the son of the founder of a reality TV empire, did Cory have any chance at redemption? The answer seemed unlikely. The judge, who had closely followed the entire trial, finally spoke. She had listened intently to statements from both sides. With a calm but unmistakably stern demeanor, she began her sentencing. "Cory Harrison," she said, "you have been found guilty of participating in an organized criminal network. Your actions, and those of your family, have caused severe harm to many individuals." Her voice steady. "The public's trust has been shattered beyond repair." She paused, letting each word sink in for those present. "You stand before this court as an active participant in criminal activities for personal gain." She continued without hesitation. "There can be no leniency in this case, as the severity of your conduct cannot be overstated." Her eyes locked onto Cory. "You have shown complete disregard for the law." "As for the reputation you once held," the judge said, her voice unwavering, "I cannot overlook the crimes you have committed." After a moment of silence, she proceeded to the sentencing. "Given the severity of your crimes and the harm you have caused, I sentence you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The words struck like thunder in the courtroom. Cory Harrison, the Pawn Star's star, once known for his humor and charm, now faced the harshest of judgments. No more spotlight, no more applause, only bars and regret. That moment slammed shut any chance of redemption through freedom. Cory's fate was now sealed by the very choices he once prided himself on. As the judge delivered the sentence, Cory's family members, some present in the courtroom, could only exchange stunned glances. Rick Harrison, who had built the pawn shop empire from nothing, now watched it crumble before his eyes. The weight of the moment bore down on everyone. No words could capture it. The Harrison family, once a symbol of resilience and success, now faced an irreparable tragedy. The media, once enamored with the Harrisons, now had an entirely different story to tell. Cory Harrison's fall, from a beloved reality TV star to a convicted criminal, was one of the most dramatic reversals in American television history. Fans who had watched Cory grow up through each episode now struggled to reconcile the truth. They couldn't align the image of the cheerful, witty young man with the criminal in handcuffs at the defendant's table. As the courtroom slowly emptied, a bitter reality settled in. It was the end of an era. The Harrison family, once a symbol of the American dream, had become an emblem of scandal and crime. Cory Harrison, poised to inherit an empire, would now spend the rest of his life behind bars. It was a stark warning of the cost of pursuing power through a path of corruption. Cory's sentence was not just the end for one man, but a turning point in the family's saga. The beloved show, which once celebrated hard work and business savvy, was now at the center of a national criminal case. The spotlight was gone, leaving only the echo of infamy. Cory's arrest and conviction delivered a devastating blow to the Harrisons' public image. A reputation carefully built over years crumbled in mere weeks. The fallout from the trial extended beyond the legal realm. It struck at the hearts of those who had connected with the show. Fans who once saw Rick and Cory as embodiments of family values, resilience, and honesty were left with only disillusionment. They grappled with the reality that the people they admired harbored such dark truths. The public's perception of the Harrison family was forever altered. Cory's wit and charm, once his signature traits, were now tainted by the reality of his role in a sophisticated criminal organization. He was no longer the funny guy behind the counter, cracking jokes and making deals. Now he stood as a symbol of betrayal and collapse. The man who once made audiences laugh each week had become a stark warning about the corruption of power. His actions helped dismantle the empire Rick Harrison spent a lifetime building. The fallout for Rick Harrison cut even deeper. He wasn't just the founder, but the face of Pawn Stars. Rick had guided viewers through journeys of value, history, and insight, turning a pawn shop into a cultural phenomenon that made his family beloved and renowned. But now, that legacy was severely shaken. Rick, the devoted father and savvy businessman, faced a brutal truth. His own son, the one he had placed unwavering trust in, had pushed everything to the brink. Rick Harrison had lost so much, not just his reputation, but his legacy. He had been a role model for entrepreneurs starting from nothing, a symbol of ambition and authenticity. The pawn shop wasn't just a business. It was a place where memories were made, bonding family across generations. From father to son, it was all captured on screen. But now, that screen no longer broadcast laughter. It carried only the echo of a tragedy, where trust was betrayed and ideals shattered by greed and wrong choices. Now, his family was at the center of one of the most shocking scandals in recent memory. The public questioned, how much did Rick Harrison know about his son's involvement? Was he truly unaware or complicit in his silence? Illegal activities had unfolded under his nose for years. How could he not have suspected? As the investigation and trial unfolded, Rick maintained a stoic silence, refraining from defending his son. The pressure to speak weighed heavily, but Rick understood the gravity of the situation. One wrong word could destroy what little remained of his personal reputation. The FBI investigation cast a dark shadow over the entire Harrison family. Any attempt to downplay Cory's role risked being seen as a cover-up, further damaging Rick's already shaky credibility. Yet, even in his silence, he couldn't escape the media's scrutiny. Articles, analyses, and commentary relentlessly targeted Rick, once a pillar of public trust. Under the weight of the exposed criminal activities, the family's image, once synonymous with integrity, collapsed. What seemed unbreakable was crushed by the burden of truth. Worst of all, the public no longer believed in Rick's innocence. The damage wasn't just to their reputation, but also financial. The once thriving business, the heart of Pawn Stars, now faced the threat of collapse. The show, once among the most watched, had become a tarnished memory. FBI revelations stripped away the admiration viewers once held, as they could no longer separate the captivating world of antiques on screen from the real-life organized crime. Trust was shattered, jeopardizing the sustainability of the Harrison brand. No one wanted to support a business tainted by criminal infamy. The pawn shop, a symbol of American family enterprise, now sat under intense public scrutiny. Customers who once eagerly visited now hesitated to step into the televised storefront. Legal challenges piled up, from financial investigations to the looming threat of civil lawsuits. No one was certain if the Harrisons could retain ownership or would be forced to sell to cover legal fees. Potential restitution for victims or liabilities from Cory's crimes hung overhead. The situation left everyone grappling with an uncertain future. For Cory's immediate family, the consequences were equally devastating. The emotional toll of the trial was a shock they could hardly overcome. His wife, who stood by him throughout the proceedings, now faced the painful reality that her husband would spend his life in prison. She not only lost her partner, but was thrust into an unwanted spotlight. Cory's children, too young to fully grasp the situation, would grow up in the shadow of a name now synonymous with crime. The family, once a picture of unity, now faced quiet disintegration and deep hurt. The family image once admired by the public now lay shattered under the weight of truth. In the days and weeks following the trial, the media continued to dig into every detail. TV shows, podcasts, online articles, and talk shows seized the opportunity to dissect the saga. They discussed the charges, the shocking evidence, and the psychological toll on the family. The story was no longer confined to the courtroom. It had spilled into popular culture. Pawn Stars wasn't just impacted, it was dragged down with the reputation of those who built it. The future of the Harrison family remains a big question mark. Rick, once the face of entrepreneurial spirit and American tradition, now must find a way to salvage what's left. He faces a nearly impossible task, restoring a shattered reputation. The business could shut down, assets might be sold off, but the hardest part is regaining trust. Meanwhile, Cory will spend the rest of his life behind bars. For Rick and the rest of the family, what they face is only the beginning. The emotional, financial, and reputational damage will linger long after the trial has ended. As the dust settled and the Harrison family began to come to terms with Cory's sentence, the world turned to reflect on the rise and fall of the Harrison empire. From humble beginnings, they rose to fame and fortune, an inspiring tale of the American dream. But behind the spotlights and cameras was a different reality. Criminal activity lurking beneath the surface, quietly undermining everything. When the truth was revealed, the seemingly unshakable empire crumbled in an instant. Cory Harrison's story serves as a cautionary tale. Fame and fortune, left unchecked, can be a double-edged sword. The consequences of living outside the law are never inescapable. The public reaction to the fall of Cory Harrison and his family empire was a media firestorm. For years, Pawn Stars had been a fixture in the entertainment lives of millions of families. Fans followed the Harrisons' journey through the world of antiques, deals, and the strange stories behind each item. Rick and Cory became familiar, relatable, and beloved television characters. But the shocking revelations of the case shattered that image. Viewers felt betrayed by the people they had trusted, and the loss is something many have yet to come to terms with. The initial reaction was one of shock and deep disbelief. Loyal fans could not believe that Cory, who had made them laugh with his wit and friendliness, could be involved in money laundering and human trafficking. Forums and social media were flooded with comments of shock, disappointment, and confusion. Many wondered if something had been misinterpreted, or if Cory had been the victim of a conspiracy. Some held out hope that things would be cleared up, that there would be a turnaround. But as the evidence continued to emerge, even the most loyal began to lose faith. Another segment of the public was unforgiving. For them, the revelation that Cory had been involved in a criminal network was a blatant betrayal. They were outraged, not just by the crime, but by the affection and admiration they had once shown him. Those who had admired his business savvy now denounced him as a manipulator. When details of his human trafficking, a crime that preyed on the vulnerable, came to light, the outrage reached fever pitch. The internet was flooded with condemnation from viewers and longtime fans alike. What had once been a strong belief was now a scourge. The media frenzy that engulfed the trial and its aftermath turned a light-hearted reality show into a symbol of corruption and scandal. Pawn Stars, once a show meant to entertain, became synonymous with organized crime. The public began to question everything they saw on screen. How much was real? How much was staged for the cameras? The Harrisons, once admired for their sincerity and simplicity, were now viewed with suspicion. And it was a rift that would be difficult to mend in a once beloved show. Not only the audience, but also the experts and the media were quick to speak out. Pop culture analysts and entertainment industry experts expressed deep disappointment. How could a show with such a huge influence like Pawn Stars hide such a dark reality? Critics said the show deliberately glamorized the pawn industry, avoiding its dark side. The Harrison family was built as devoted fathers and sons, but behind it could be a system that exploited and profited from vulnerable people. The gap between the image on television and the truth is what deeply hurt the public. The show once focused on the thrill of finding rare items, the hilarious negotiations, and the quirky customers. But now, all of that is overshadowed by the grim reality. Behind the famous pawn shop door lies a network of organized crime. Pawn Stars was once the American dream, a successful family business, an inspirational story. Now it's a cautionary tale about the dark side of fame, reality TV, and public trust. And whether the show continues or not, its image has been forever changed for audiences around the world. For some critics, the scandal exposed the ugly underbelly of reality television, where the pursuit of fame and fortune can sometimes lead to unethical, even criminal behavior. The criminal activities uncovered within the Harrison family empire also sparked a broader conversation about the connection between reality television and real-life crime. Many viewers began to question the role that network producers and show creators play in shaping the public image of reality TV stars. Were they complicit in building Harrison's brand without properly examining his business practices? Did the success of Pawn Stars blind the network to potential warning signs of Harrison's illegal activities? Some critics say the entertainment industry, in its pursuit of ratings and profits, has failed to investigate the truth behind its public image, allowing stars to thrive in the spotlight while engaging in criminal behavior behind the scenes. For the Harrison family, the public backlash was both immediate and intense. The fallout extended beyond the loss of their television show or their public reputation, and extended to the personal lives of those involved. Rick Harrison, once a beloved figure on Pawn Stars, now found himself in the crosshairs of public scrutiny. Fans who once admired him for his business acumen and leadership now questioned his integrity. What did Rick know about his son's involvement in criminal activities? Was he complicit or unaware of the dark side of the family business? These questions loom large, and the lack of answers only adds to the public's distrust of the Harrison family. Rick remained silent throughout much of the scandal, but his silence did little to stem the tide of public criticism. The patriarch of the family, Rick, was often seen as the moral compass of the business he built the pawn shop empire around. Many felt he should have known about the criminal activities taking place under his roof. While Rick did not face criminal enterprise charges, his public image was forever tarnished by his involvement in his son's crimes. Ultimately, the Harrison family scandal is not only a shocking event in the entertainment industry, but also a great lesson about personal and community responsibility in the world of reality television. Questions about the involvement of TV stars and transparency in the entertainment industry will be discussed for a long time. Now more than ever, we need to be clear about what is happening behind the camera and ensure that those who have a great influence on the public are held accountable for their actions. If you care about justice and want this story to be known to more people, like and share to spread the information. Leave a comment so we can discuss and see the truth together. See you in the next video. Cory Harrison collapsed in court, tears streaming down his face as he faced the painful truth. His father, Rick Harrison, the familiar face of Pawn Stars, and his longtime friend Chumley were both sentenced to life in prison. The verdict echoed in the courtroom, leaving not only Cory but the entire world stunned. Rick, who had once built a famous pawn empire, now faced the reality of spending the rest of his life behind bars for human trafficking and money laundering. His downfall wasn't just a shock to his family, but to the millions of fans who had followed him. However, It wasn't just the sentence that was so shocking, but Cory's raw breakdown that left everyone speechless. While many might have thought a son could remain strong through such challenges, seeing Cory collapse and sob uncontrollably made the entire courtroom fall silent. His emotional testimony not only opened a painful new chapter in the Harrison family's story, but also revealed troubling details about what truly happened behind the scenes of the famous television show. Welcome to the channel. If you find this story interesting, leave a comment with the number 1, and if not, leave a comment with the number 0. Don't forget to hit like, share this video with your friends and everyone around you. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any truly exciting stories and shocking revelations in the future. Now, let's dive into today's story. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the drop of a pin. The judge's voice cut through the silence like a sharp blade. Finally, Rick Harrison. For his crimes, this court sentences him to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. No words, no breath, no movement, until a choking sob echoed from the front row. Cory Harrison, the son of the man just sentenced, a face once familiar to millions of viewers of Pawn Stars every week, now tear-streaked and trembling, barely able to stand. He clenched a crumpled tissue in one hand, the other pressing hard against his mouth as if to stifle the scream that had nowhere to escape. Then came the second blow. Austin Lee Russell, known to the public as Chumlee, was also sentenced to life in prison. The courtroom stirred with soft, collective gasps, a sense of disbelief. Some still couldn't reconcile the sentences with the men they had seen, laughing, negotiating, and charming their way through television contracts and antique treasures. But this wasn't TV. This was reality. And the gravity of what had just happened had finally caught up with the truth. Just 10 feet from the defense table, Cory turned toward the courtroom, his red eyes, slumped shoulders, and a heart clearly shattered as he collapsed into the arms of a family friend. It was a moment too raw, too painful for even the reporters to lift their cameras. This wasn't just the fall of a reality TV star. It was the collapse of a legacy, a father-son empire now permanently tarnished by the darkest crimes imaginable, human trafficking and money laundering. And as America watched in horror, one question rose above the noise, echoing louder than any headline. Why didn't we see this coming? The legend of fame and the men behind it. For years, Pawn Stars had been one of the most beloved shows on the History Channel, a show about a family-run pawn shop in Las Vegas, dealing in everything from Civil War relics to classic collectibles. Little did people know, the show was lighthearted, fun, with strange and lovable characters, yet practical. Rick Harrison was the face of it all, smart, straightforward, with a passion for history. His son Cory, muscular, rebellious at times, and then there was Chumlee, always getting into trouble but never crossing the line, or so he thought. Together they had built not just a TV show but a brand, a cultural platform, a money-making machine. And now, it all lay in ruins. What makes this collapse so devastating isn't just the crime, but the deception, the betrayal of trust from millions who welcomed them into their homes, treated them like family, cheered for their success. No one saw the hidden layers beneath the surface. No one saw the young women lured in by empty promises. No one saw the secret money trails leading to offshore accounts and illegal transactions. No one saw the darkness simmering beneath the laughter, cameras, applause, and deal closings, except one person, a woman, her identity still protected. A woman who knew Rick very well and claimed he confessed to her not out of guilt, but pride. The confession changed everything, according to court records and leaked sworn affidavits. It all began one evening of drinking. Rick boasted, in fact, he thought he was untouchable. The cameras, the fans, how people lit up when they saw him. He was a god in Las Vegas, but also a man with flaws. He told me he made more money behind the scenes than he ever did on the show. The woman claimed, "I asked him, 'How do you laugh?' He replied, 'Not everything I do is filmed, darling.'" That wasn't the worst part. When she pieced everything together, strange late-night messages, sudden trips out of state, unreasonable cash withdrawals, she began connecting the dots. And once she did, she realized she couldn't ignore it any longer. She handed everything over to the authorities, and that one decision brought Rick Harrison and Chumley's world to light like a poorly sewn quilt. The empire they had built, every deal, every camera, every transaction, was about to be exposed as a front for a criminal underground no one ever expected. On March 14th, when the FBI knocked on their door in the early morning, a day that should have been like any other, instead, federal agents surrounded gold and silver pawn shop. A coordinated raid that reflected a military campaign. Trucks carrying weapons, media flying overhead like vultures, sensing that something had died beneath the surface. Within hours, both Rick Harrison and Austin Chumley Russell were in federal custody. What they found was staggering. Encrypted devices, fake passports, unregistered cash bundles, names of women on labor contracts that didn't match legal records, and a separate hard drive believed to contain footage used for coercion. And among all of this, there was one man who didn't know what he had been dragged into. Cory Harrison. Cory, the heir, the clueless pawn, he didn't know. At least that's what he said to the court. That's what he whispered through tears when he testified against himself. Dad. That's what he told himself while pacing back and forth in his room that night, trying to recall every moment, every conversation, every hint that something wasn't right. Cory grew up in the pawn shop world. He wasn't handed a silver spoon. He was handed a rusty spoon, taught to polish it, sell it, and make something of himself. But what happens when the man teaching you those lessons also teaches you to lie? "I want to believe it's all true," Cory told the jury, his voice choking. "I want to believe my dad was just smart in business. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know." But guilt doesn't need clarity. Guilt doesn't need proof of personal involvement. Sometimes guilt comes in the form of silence, turning a blind eye, not asking questions. You were too scared to know the answer. Why does this story matter more than ever? In a world where fame often acts as a shield, where reality TV stars become fake royalty, this story reminds us of something simple and chilling. You never really know who anyone is, especially when they're in front of the cameras. The case of Rick Harrison isn't just about two men going to prison. It's about how we, the public, are enchanted by charm, how easily we believe in a brand, how quickly we overlook red flags to support comfort, and, most painfully, about those who are hurt, while everyone laughs along to a reality show that hides something horrifying. This is the story of betrayal, justice, and the price of silence. A story that started in the bright lights of a pawn shop and ended in the cold gray cement of a prison cell. And as the cameras fade, one man, Cory Harrison, is left in the rubble, trying to rebuild what's left of himself. It didn't start with fame. It didn't start with reality TV cameras or the fleeting appearance of a celebrity or millions of dollars in collectibles. It started like many American stories, with a struggle in Las Vegas in the early 1980s, a city sparkling with sin and neon lights. But behind the bright lights were families struggling to make a living. Richard Benjamin Harrison, known as an old man who moved to Vegas with his family, struggling to make ends meet after a series of tough moments. He didn't care about fame. He cared about survival. It was here, in the dusty, unpredictable desert city, that the Harrison family planted the seeds that would one day grow into an empire. A single pawn shop, Gold and Silver Pawn, opened in 1989. No frills, no gimmicks, just a father and son buying and selling anything that came through the door. And it was Rick Harrison, the son of that old man, who saw what most people didn't. He wasn't just selling old guitars and dusty coins. He saw opportunity in the stories behind the items. He knew that history was being sold, and people loved the stories. In the early 2000s, the shop created a wave in Vegas. The locals knew it as a reliable place with solid but fair negotiations. Rick, with his vast knowledge of antiques, became the face of the shop, and he wasn't alone. His son Cory, just a teenager at the time, was being prepared to inherit the family business. But Rick didn't stop at selling goods. He had a vision. What if the world could watch what happens behind the counter? What if the unique characters, rare items, and intense negotiations could become something bigger? He pitched the idea for years, facing rejection after rejection, but Rick didn't give up. Finally, his persistence paid off in 2009 when the History Channel gave them a chance. A new type of reality TV show was born: Pawn Stars. At first, no one expected much. Another show about a niche industry expected to live and die quietly under the shadow of bigger titles. But the magic hit instantly. Rick's grumpy wisdom, Cory's youthful perspective, and Chumley's goofy antics, a friend of Cory's who was known more for comic relief than actual pawnbroking, all blended into a formula. America couldn't stop watching this explode. Within months, Pawn Stars became a cultural phenomenon, and not only viewers showed up, but celebrities like George Stephanopoulos, Bob Dylan, and even presidents and athletes appeared as guests or sent items to the pawn shop. The Gold and Silver Pawn Shop became a tourist attraction, with fans lining up outside just to catch a glimpse of their favorite reality TV star. Rick Harrison had become the king of this newly found kingdom. He didn't just sell items. He told the story behind every Civil War rifle, every Elvis signature, every classic Coca-Cola sign, turning them into anchors for the past. Viewers learned while they laughed, and the History Channel struck gold. Ironically, through a pawn shop, Cory was thrust into the spotlight. He had grown up in the shadows of the shop, now suddenly flooding millions of homes across the world. Viewers loved his straightforward demeanor. He was the modern muscle of the operation, youthful, a bit bold, but sharp. And then came Chumley Austin Russell, Cory's childhood friend, who quickly transitioned from backstage assistant to fan favorite. His cluelessness was used for laughs. He was clumsy, teased, but the audience adored him. He was the lovable fool in a world of sharp salespeople. Together, the four men became more than colleagues. They became characters in a world that was supposed to have no script. Their boundaries blurred. Their characters became reality, and with fame came unimaginable wealth. Rick quickly capitalized on it. He was no longer just a pawn shop owner. He was an author, a speaker, and an investor. He opened restaurants, signed endorsement deals, and started side businesses. Chumley opened his own candy store and sold designer goods. Cory also embraced the celebrity lifestyle, luxury cars, red carpets, exclusive events. But it wasn't just about the big things, it was about the daily money. Lines of people outside the shop, fast-moving products on the shelves, autographs, meet and greets. The gold and silver pawn shop was said to rake in thousands of dollars every day, sometimes reaching hundreds of thousands at peak seasons. Business was booming. Behind the scenes, Rick maintained tight control. He managed the show, staff, and finances, while Chumley played the fool. Rick was always watching, always planning, always expanding. For a time, everything seemed perfect. But perfection doesn't live in the mask, and as time passed, that mask began to crack. Small signs started appearing. Rumors, silent staff turnover, inventory losses, whispers about backstage deals. But no one wanted to hear it, not when the show was still drawing millions, not when Rick had become something of a national treasure, not when the illusion was far more enticing than the reality. Cory was also caught up in it. He trusted his father. He trusted Chumley. These were the men he had grown up with, the men who had built him into who he was. He didn't ask too many questions about why they did what they did. Everything was fine, but not everyone around them was blind. A few former employees had spoken up over the years, quietly and anonymously, claiming shady behavior, strange accounting practices, unusual guests who never appeared on camera. But there was no solid proof, and their warnings were dismissed as jealousy or bitterness, and those who were too curious didn't stay long. The Pawn Stars machine continued with new episodes, new seasons, broadcast contracts, international audiences, spin-offs, and documentaries. The legend of Rick Harrison as a smart but rude man, everyone's favorite history buff, was reinforced in pop culture. Cory was the contemplative son, Chumley the clown with a golden heart. But behind the carefully selected front of television, the real story was smoldering, slowly, dangerously. The rise was as fast as a shooting star, but the fall would shake the earth. Because while America watched with popcorn in hand, the men behind the Pawn Stars were believed to be running business as usual, with no cameras allowed to record the business dealings that would ultimately cost them everything. And when the illusion shattered, Cory, the son caught in the middle, would have to choose between protecting the legacy or speaking out the truth. He chose the truth, and it broke him before the alarm bells, before the chains, and long before the courtroom lights turned Rick Harrison's face from a beloved businessman to a convicted human trafficker. There had been whispers. They didn't start with official complaints, but with uncomfortable glances, casual remarks, and stories shared over beers between late-night staffers. Subtle warnings that everyone overlooked because they didn't fit the story everyone had accepted. After all, how could a history-loving, jolly patriarch, a hit TV show, be anything other than what he appeared to be? An accomplished businessman, a sharp negotiator. A reality TV icon. But the truth, as it always does, had leaked long before the headlines. Those who had worked at Gold and Silver Pawn before the fame remember a different Rick. Not evil, but controlling. A perfectionist. A man obsessed with two things: winning every deal and keeping control. He could be generous one day and ruthless the next. His mood was unpredictable, and that volatility affected how he ran the business. Then came the cameras. They changed everything. With them came the power of recognition, money. Rick, who once stayed late to reorganize shelves and sweep floors, now walked with the air of someone untouchable. Cory noticed that, too. There were moments his dad seemed distant. Not physically, as he was still in the shop every day, but emotionally distant. There were side deals happening off-camera. Not every transaction was put on a show, of course, that was expected, but some were different. Some large amounts of cash were moved quietly. Some clients didn't want to be filmed, and Rick didn't object. He'd take them to the back room, lock the door, and go out alone. A few minutes later, no receipt, no item exchanged, and no one could remember. At first, no one asked why. The show was a cash cow. The shop was crowded with customers lining up around the block most weekends. Chumley was becoming his own brand. Cory attended conventions and autograph signings. Everyone was winning. Still, there were oddities. A woman who worked inventory for 3 years left without notice and never answered calls or messages from her colleagues. She had once joked that Rick had more in the safe than just old coins. No one thought much about it at the time, just another sarcastic remark from someone who spent too much time around antiques and drama. Then came a tech guy, an outside consultant hired to upgrade the shop's security cameras. According to a startling statement he later gave to a local reporter, there were blind spots in the shop, areas deliberately created where footage would mysteriously be cut or skipped altogether. He raised the issue directly with Rick. Rick was said to have responded, "Just fix what I told you to fix," and ended the contract a week later. Clients also had their stories. Some female clients said they were offered private appraisals after hours. One woman in her 20s at the time told a friend she was invited to a VIP pawn opportunity, only to find herself in an upstairs office alone with Rick and Chumley. She said she felt uncomfortable, but no crime occurred. She quickly left and never returned. These stories were shared quietly, dismissed as rumors because when you stand in the presence of a celebrity, the truth has a funny way of becoming optional. The legend of Rick Harrison was too powerful to doubt, and for many years that legend protected him. But not everyone was fooled. A former producer from the show who worked in the early seasons before being abruptly fired later revealed that Rick insisted on controlling the final edits. Not just for creative direction, but also to ensure certain scenes didn't air. Scenes where conversations ventured into suspicious territory. A specific edit that the producer claimed involved a segment cut, where Rick asked a teenage girl there how much she was really selling a necklace for. The way he asked and the way he smiled didn't sit right with the film crew. It was edited out and never mentioned again. There were no reports, no accusations, no clear evidence, just discomfort. Then came the real estate deals. Rick had started purchasing multiple properties around Las Vegas. It wasn't unusual for a wealthy man like him, but some were kept secret through a shell company LLC, sourced from offshore accounts. The transactions were pretty quiet, with some homes rarely being used. Neighbors reported seeing young women come and go, but they assumed it was just Hollywood's eccentric lifestyle. However, a neighbor went to the police after hearing screams one night. No charges were brought, and the woman who was reportedly screaming was never seen again. Nothing of this was reported at the time, and no information reached Cory. He had been isolated, busy traveling, managing contracts, building a brand, filming episodes, drinking, and enjoying his newfound fame as part of America's TV dynasty. He trusted his father, he trusted Chumley, but trusted his limits. And when strange moments began to appear, Cory started to feel uncomfortable. It wasn't one big event, but dozens of small ones. The times his father paid in cash for things that didn't need to be paid in cash, people showing up at family barbecues that no one could identify, how Chumley started acting more closed off, reckless, and aggressive. There were also issues with money disappearing in 2021. Cory's accountant had flagged an anomaly in the business account. Nearly $600,000 was withdrawn over a 6-month period without any clear paperwork. Cory casually raised the issue with Rick over weekend breakfast. Rick laughed and said it was just business diversification, but when Cory asked for details, Rick changed the subject. Then came the moment Cory would never speak of publicly, a moment he later hinted at in court, but never explained further. According to the transcript, the judge asked him when he first suspected something might be wrong. Cory hesitated, then answered, "It was one night at the shop. After hours, I saw something I wasn't supposed to see." When pressed, he shook his head and said, "I don't want to talk about it." But it changed the way I viewed my father. That moment could have been the beginning of the end, the moment when denial was broken and doubt began to take root. Cory didn't leave the company immediately, but something inside him had changed. He began to question, dig deeper into the books, observe his father, listen more closely to the conversations he'd once ignored. What he discovered in the following year would leave him stunned to the core when the FBI came knocking. Cory wasn't surprised, he was heartbroken. But not surprised because deep inside, the whispers had become shouts, and once he stopped ignoring them, he could no longer pretend. The red flags had always been there, the missed signs, the quiet warnings, the people who tried to speak up and were dismissed. They were all part of the story, and the price for ignoring them, that price, was everything she hadn't planned to expose in public, at least not at first. Not really the woman who ultimately became the whistleblower at the center of Rick Harrison's downfall. She never intended to expose one of America's most famous reality TV stars. When she first entered his life, she saw him as charming, independent, smart, and successful. He had charisma, powerful connections, and above all, confidence. But beneath all that, she would soon discover something far more dangerous. The cruelty and arrogance about things that should have made any sensible person sick. Her relationship with Rick began in a familiar way. A chance encounter in Las Vegas, casual conversation, then frequent contact. She wasn't just a fan. She had her own background in marketing and collectibles, which intrigued Rick. He slowly brought her closer, first on a professional level, and not long after, their relationship became more ambiguous. She became his confidant, sometimes a romantic interest, sometimes an assistant, sometimes just someone to talk to in the middle of the night when the cameras stopped rolling and the public persona was stripped away. On one of those nights, with a bourbon glass in hand, Rick seemed unusually jubilant as he told her something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. He was boasting. She never forgot that part. He wasn't ashamed, he wasn't whispering, he wasn't confiding, he was boasting. According to her official testimony, he leaned in and said, "I have side jobs that the network will never understand. I've built an empire, darling, not just in this store, but in actually controlling real things with real money that I don't bring on camera." She thought he was joking, maybe drunk, maybe exaggerating. But then he continued. He talked about the homes he bought under false names, the girls there, the deals he brokered outside the walls of the pawn shop, how he had friends in high places, how no one dared to outsmart him. "It's like he needed me to know," she said later in an interview. "He wanted me to see how powerful he was, that he could get away with anything." He said something I'll never forget. "You think I've come this far? Play fair, please." At first, she rationalized it. Maybe that was the Vegas ego talking, the kind of bragging powerful men do to appear bigger than they really are. But the more time she spent with him, the more cracks she noticed. Strange late-night phone calls, sudden unexplained trips out of state, always urgent, always with cash transactions, thick envelopes with no clear reason. Young women sometimes barely of age coming in and out of his private office during hours when the shop should have been closed. One of them was crying. The woman started to ask questions, but Rick was always 2 steps ahead, knowing how to answer them. He called them business opportunities, exclusive consultants, private salespeople. He made her feel stupid for asking. "You don't understand? Don't understand the world I operate in?" And she wanted to believe him, because believing him meant not facing the truth that she might be sitting across from a man capable of trafficking people. But one night, everything changed. She unexpectedly arrived at one of Rick's private residences, a house he said was just a quiet place to get away from everything. But once there, she noticed something strange. There were cameras, but not the kind you'd expect. No doorbell cameras, no security alarms, just lenses pointed into the bedroom, the living area, and the hallway. All of them recorded expensive furniture, yet the rooms were strangely empty. No personal items, no photos, no clothes in the closets, as if people had come and gone but never really left. Then she found a drawer in a simple bedside table. Inside, she discovered 6 mobile phones with no identifiers, all powered off, from various brands, alongside foreign passports, mostly belonging to women from different countries, all seemingly under the age of 25. She didn't say a word. She left quickly. That night, she made a decision. She had been silent for far too long. She handed over what she had found to the authorities, and with that, became a key witness in a federal investigation that had quietly been tracking Rick Harrison for more than a year. Her testimony became the catalyst for a full-scale operation the FBI had suspected. Anonymous tips had leaked for years, but nothing concrete, nothing actionable. But this was the break they needed. A reliable source, physical evidence, first-hand accounts. The investigation moved swiftly. Undercover agents were sent to the pawn shop, surveillance was ramped up, phone records were pulled, finances were forensically examined. He wasn't just involved in shady deals, he was coordinating a human trafficking operation, using his reputation as a smokescreen. Women were recruited with promises of opportunity, modeling gigs, antique evaluations, even supposed appearances on the show. They were taken around the country and, in many cases, never heard from again. The money laundering operation was more sophisticated, involving offshore accounts, cryptocurrency transactions, and a network of LLCs scattered across the country. Chumley, they discovered, was not just a bystander. He played a role, sometimes as a recruiter, sometimes as an enforcer, always close enough to Rick for things to continue, but far enough for plausible deniability. It was this whistleblower who provided investigators with their roadmap. And then, she was afraid. Rick had powerful connections, ties to law enforcement, political donors. He had once boasted to her that he could make a problem disappear faster than it appeared. She didn't know what that meant at the time. Now she feared she understood. For months, she lived in fear, changed her phone number, moved out of state, double-checked the locks every night. She wasn't just afraid of Rick. She was afraid of what it meant to speak out against someone so publicly beloved and admired. When the story finally broke, She watched the headlines from a cheap hotel room in Arizona, alone, waiting in anxiety. But when news confirmed Rick and Chumley had been arrested, she cried, not out of joy or relief, but out of sorrow for the lives lost, the women hurt, and the innocence the world once believed existed behind the door of a pawn shop. Her identity remains sealed by court order. Even in the trial transcripts, she is only referred to by a pseudonym. The court valued her protection. So did the FBI. Because they knew that without her, none of this would have come to light. This was her confession, her courage, her voice in the dark that lifted the curtain. And it wasn't just what Rick had done that made her speak, but the fact that he bragged. He bragged. That's what haunted her most. Because in his eyes, it wasn't a crime. It was a victory. A show of power proving he had beaten the system, that he had fooled everyone. And for a long time, he had. But no more. She ended her sworn testimony with a single sentence, one that echoed long after the court delivered its verdict, one that still haunts her in every article, every interview, every recent press conference. The late-night special covered the case he never confessed to out of remorse. She said he confessed because he thought I'd be impressed. He was wrong, and now he'll spend the rest of his life in prison because someone had the courage to stop staying silent. It was a fresh Tuesday morning in Las Vegas. The sun had just begun to rise over the horizon, casting long shadows across streets bathed in neon lights. Locals were still sipping their first cups of coffee. Tourists were stumbling home after long nights of blackjack. The city's daily rhythm was just starting to stir. But at one specific address on the Las Vegas Strip, 713 South Las Vegas Boulevard, the storm had already arrived. Unmarked black SUVs turned the corner in perfect coordination, gliding like shadows, fast, silent, and without warning. FBI agents in tactical vests poured out with practiced precision. Some moved toward the back alley, others approached the main entrance of one of the most recognizable stores in America, the gold and silver pawn shop. No alarms. No flashing lights. This wasn't a show. This was the end of one. Inside, Rick Harrison was reviewing inventory with a junior employee. Chumley was in the break room, devouring a burrito while checking his crypto wallet. Cory Harrison, noticeably, wasn't there. He had taken a few days off to attend a charity event in California. His absence would later be seen as a small miracle, sparing him from the chaos that followed. The raid was initiated at exactly 7:36 a.m. One by one, employees were pulled into the lobby, ordered to surrender their phones and stay calm. No one knew exactly what was happening, but the look on the agents' faces made it clear. This wasn't just some tax audit. They had a warrant, a thick stack of documents signed by a federal judge. The charges listed included human trafficking, interstate extortion, conspiracy to exploit minors, and large-scale money laundering. If you find this story interesting and want to learn more, don't forget to like, share the video, and leave your comments below to let us know your thoughts. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on other exciting videos. Now, let's continue with the story. Rick asked to speak with his lawyer. Chumley tried to crack a joke. No one was in the mood. The shop, once filled with historical artifacts and quirky collectibles, was now swarming with federal investigators. Every drawer was opened. Every safe was cracked. Every secret room was uncovered. The agents had come prepared. They knew exactly what they were looking for. In the basement, a space the public had never seen, There was a locked steel door disguised as part of the wall. Behind it, agents uncovered what would later be described in court as a digital vault. Servers, laptops, external hard drives, surveillance monitors, foreign language documents, contracts, and dozens of women's names, some aliases, some with no record in any public database. And the video footage, so disturbing the court later sealed it from public release. It showed young women clearly in distress, inside private rooms furnished identically to those seen in previously leaked photos from Rick's off-site properties. The videos had timestamps, dates, even audio in some cases, the kind of evidence no legal team could spin or suppress. Upstairs, in the office where Rick once worked daily, investigators found another kind of proof. Stacks of cash, hidden behind bookshelves, under floorboards, and stuffed into hollowed-out antiques. One agent reportedly counted more than $240,000 in loose bills, each one stamped and dated. Next to them were burner phones, cash, fake IDs, international wire receipts, and an encrypted list of overseas transactions. In Chumley's desk drawer, investigators found something else. Dozens of photos of women in various stages of undress. Some were unconscious prints, not digital images, and several had dates written on the back. When questioned later, Chumley claimed they were just souvenirs from parties. But investigators saw them as evidence of predatory behavior. The raid lasted nearly 6 hours. Once the media caught wind of what was happening, the front of the pawn shop was sealed off with yellow tape. News vans arrived, reporters scrambled for position, and helicopters circled overhead capturing aerial footage of the scene below. Crowds began to gather. Local fans, curious tourists, none of them could believe it. Many thought it was a hoax, maybe a film shoot. After all, Rick and Chumley were TV stars, celebrities. This had to be some kind of publicity stunt. Right. Until agents escorted Rick and Chumley into the backs of separate SUVs, handcuffed and stone-faced. That's when it hit. This wasn't a performance, a joke, or a special episode. This was real. Later that same day, FBI spokesperson Karen Mendoza held a press conference. "We have uncovered significant evidence implicating Mr. Richard Harrison and Mr. Austin Russell in an active criminal operation involving the exploitation and trafficking of young women across state lines, as well as the laundering of illicit funds through both domestic and international financial networks." She declined to answer any questions. The charges were made public the following morning. Rick Harrison, 17 federal counts including conspiracy to traffic, fraud, extortion, and obstruction of justice. Austin, Chumley, Russell, 13 federal counts including aiding and abetting, destruction of evidence, and criminal conspiracy. The 84-page indictment laid out the details of a network that had allegedly been operating for nearly a decade, spanning multiple states and involving suspected international ties. Victims were reportedly recruited under false pretenses, fake modeling contracts, business partnerships, TV opportunities, then manipulated, coerced, or threatened into silence. Money from the operation was funneled through shell companies connected to cryptocurrency wallets, offshore real estate holdings, and even fake merchandise sales. Investigators traced over $7.8 million in suspicious transactions, all under Rick's name. The public reaction was swift. The History Channel pulled all reruns of Pawn Stars from the air. Rick's public appearances at major bookstores were canceled. His memoir was pulled from shelves, and all endorsement deals were terminated. Chumley's product lines were shut down within hours. His candy shop closed. His social media accounts went dark. And Cory, he flew back to Vegas that same day.
Upon landing, he was met by FBI agents and informed of the situation. According to a close source, he collapsed into a chair at the airport and said nothing for 20 minutes. When he finally spoke, he asked only one question. What did they find? Because even though Cory had begun to suspect something was wrong, nothing could have prepared him for the scale, the precision, the horror of what was truly happening behind the walls he had practically grown up within. The gold and silver pawn shop, now a crime scene. Its windows were sealed shut, its locks changed, its legacy shattered. What was once a cultural institution, a beacon of the past, a school of American grit and charm, is now a cautionary tale about how fame can hide the darkest truths. And the raid was only the beginning, because now the world would be watching as the trial began, as victims came forward, as evidence was presented in packed courtrooms full of journalists, activists, and former fans of Rick and Chumley. And at the center of it all was Cory Harrison, a son forced to confront a truth too brutal to ignore, a man caught between the family he loved and the justice he could no longer turn away from. Everything had collapsed, and now the world would witness what was left. This was the trial the entire nation couldn't look away from. In the heart of Las Vegas, under the scorching desert sun, the Clark County Courthouse had turned into a fortress. Barricades lined the sidewalks. Cameras were mounted on every pole. Reporters, microphones in hand, packed in beside satellite vans to get the story. Helicopters hovered high enough to glimpse the chaos below. Monday, July 3rd. The United States versus Richard Harrison and Austin Russell. What was once a fan-favorite reality show was now the centerpiece of one of the most explosive federal criminal trials in modern entertainment history. People lined up on the sidewalk as if they were waiting for concert tickets. Not for a red carpet premiere, but to witness the downfall of men once idolized by millions. Rick Harrison, the calculating mastermind behind Pawn Stars, and his longtime friend and co-star Chumley, real name Austin Lee Russell. They entered the courtroom flanked by U.S. Marshals. The polos and smiles were gone. In their place were orange jumpsuits, shackled ankles, and blank expressions, their posture stiff, their hair limp. It wasn't just the weight of chains, it was the weight of what was about to unfold. The courtroom itself was locked down for security reasons. Only a select group of reporters, legal teams, and victims were allowed access. But what happened inside spread quickly across the globe. Because what unfolded in the coming weeks wasn't just a trial. It was a reckoning. Presiding over the case was Judge Naomi Richter, a no-nonsense federal judge known for her unflinching gaze and meticulous attention to detail. She had handled high-profile cases before, gang takedowns, political scandals, but even she seemed to grasp the gravity of what was happening in her courtroom. The opening statements set the tone. The prosecution wasted no time. "Ladies and gentlemen," began lead federal prosecutor Elena Marquez, "this case is not about celebrity. It's not about television. It's about the systemic exploitation of vulnerable human lives hidden behind the curtain of fame and wealth. The defendants used their public image to build trust, and behind the camera, they betrayed it." Marquez then took the jury down a cold path, a timeline of deceit, an operational map. She revealed that over a 10-year span, Rick Harrison and Austin Russell orchestrated a trafficking ring disguised behind their television success. The pawn shop wasn't just a business. It was a recruitment center. Dozens of young women were lured in with promises of TV appearances, job offers, even fake speaking events.
Some were filmed. Others disappeared. Many never spoke, until now. On the defense side, the tone was starkly different. Rick's attorney, Wallace Mendes, leaned on what many assumed would be the only viable strategy: denial and distance. "My client is a businessman, a father, a television personality, not a predator," Mendes said. "We categorically deny that Mr. Harrison participated in or even knew about these alleged crimes." The prosecution, he claimed, was using circumstantial evidence and the testimony of questionable individuals to smear a man who had contributed to this country through education and entertainment. Chumley's defense, led by attorney Jasmine Kerr, painted him as a follower, not a leader. A man swept up in Rick's world, too naive or too dependent to grasp the severity of what was happening around him. But both strategies began to unravel the moment the prosecution called its first witness. She was a young woman identified only as Maya, her identity protected. She was just 19 when she first walked into the gold and silver pawn shop. She testified that Rick Harrison himself offered her a chance to model vintage jewelry for a commercial segment. She was ecstatic. A fan of the show, a Vegas local, excited for the opportunity. But what began as a dream quickly turned into a nightmare. Her testimony described a slow, terrifying descent into coercion. She was handed exclusive contracts she didn't understand, moved between Rick's private properties, had her phone taken, was filmed, her voice threatened. Her hands shook as she spoke. The courtroom stayed silent as she cried, "I thought he was helping me, but he was selling me." The defense tried to discredit her. They pointed to inconsistencies in her timeline. They pulled up old social media posts where she was smiling in photos with Rick. They asked if she'd made up her story for attention, but she never wavered. And neither did the next three witnesses, each woman telling a different version of the same story. Lured in, trapped, exploited. All of them described Chumley's presence, sometimes during recruitment. At other times, he was described as a follower. One witness claimed he bragged about keeping everyone in line. Another said he had locked her in a room for a week after she refused to obey his orders. Then came the digital evidence. The FBI presented a hard drive recovered from Rick's secret basement room and 2 other properties. It contained thousands of image files, videos, financial records, and emails. The jury was shown painful details of how the entire operation worked. There were clips of Rick discussing transaction logs for the girls, showing payments funneled through fake LLCs. Audio clips of Chumley talking about routes and stops. There was nothing to suggest a misunderstanding, nothing to suggest coincidence. Perhaps the most damning evidence came from Rick himself, an audio memo buried in a secure folder labeled X Secure 2020, recorded on his own phone. In it, Rick can be heard talking to an unnamed associate. "We're protected. They'll never look here, not with the cameras pointed the other way." When that audio was played, several members of the jury visibly changed. One woman gasped, another wiped tears from her eyes. The energy in the courtroom shifted. The weight of the guilt was no longer a theory. It had been recorded. Rick's team tried to argue that the voice memo was fabricated, made up, but forensic analysis confirmed the authenticity of the audio, the voice, the phone, and the recording. Even the surrounding noise matched Rick's known home office. Then came the moment no one expected. Cory Harrison took the stand, dressed in a dark gray suit, his eyes heavy, his face pale. He didn't look like the TV personality fans remembered. No sunglasses, no cocky demeanor. just a man crushed under the weight of his name. He was sworn in and asked if he understood the consequences of perjury. He did. Then he began. "I love my dad," Cory said, his voice quiet but steady. "But love is not an excuse for what he did." He admitted that he had noticed things over the years: money missing, just cash, shady transactions, private meetings with people who weren't customers or clients. But above all, he confessed to one night that had never been publicly discussed. When he opened a hidden drawer in his father's office and found a ledger, a list of names, dates, and codes he couldn't understand. The next morning, he asked Rick about it. Rick's response was, "Don't look into things that aren't yours." That was the moment, Cory testified. Something inside me changed. I stopped asking questions because I was afraid of the answer. And then he broke down. The prosecution handed him a set of photos, some of the victims, including one girl who had come to the shop years ago hoping to return. Cory stared at the photo for nearly 30 seconds in silence, then broke down. "I met her. I remember her. She just wanted to learn. I didn't know. I didn't know they'd do this to her." The judge called for a recess. The courtroom fell almost silent. Even the reporters held their tongues as they filed out, heads bowed, processing the emotional weight of what they had just witnessed. When the trial resumed, Cory apologized for losing his composure, but his testimony continued. He described how he had gradually realized the guilt of not speaking up sooner and how he decided to fully cooperate with the FBI after the arrest was made. His closing words to the jury rang out like a funeral bell. "I wish I could say I was brave enough to stop it, but the truth is, I was too scared. And I live with that every day." The courtroom went silent. No one clapped. No one cheered. There was no theatrical music or commercial break, just the raw, painful reality. The defense didn't cross-examine Cory for long. They understood his pain was real, his testimony was credible, his shame was undeniable. As the trial continued, more evidence came forward, more victims, more photos, more bank statements, forensic reports. Each day brought a new wave of horror, and each day, Rick and Chumley sat silently. No outbursts, no apologies, no explanations. All eyes were on them. And as the trial neared its final stages, it became increasingly clear that this wasn't just a case about two men. It was about the exploitation of power. It was about how far people can go when they believe they're untouchable. And now, their time was up. For years, Austin Lee Russell, also known as Chumley, played the lovable fool on Pawn Stars. He was the clown, the one who made people laugh, the guy who always seemed out of his depth when haggling over a broken guitar or a suspiciously fake item. She showed up unannounced at one of Rick's hidden residences, a house he once casually described as just a quiet place to get away from it all. But the moment she stepped inside, something felt disturbingly wrong. The house was too clean, too empty, too sterile, like a stage set with no actors. There were cameras, but not the kind that faced the outside for protection. No doorbell cams, no alarms. Every lens pointed inward, into the bedroom, the living area, and down every hallway. All quietly filming lavish furniture, positioned with care. But no signs of actual life. There was no toothbrush, no bottle of face wash, not a single personal photo, not even a shirt hanging in the closet. Everything was arranged like a stage, ready for a performance. But no one ever showed up to act. She looked around in silence, each step making her chest heavier.
Then she noticed a small side table next to the bed. Inside were 6 cell phones, all powered off, no cases, no branding. They were from different manufacturers, but shared one thing in common. They left no trace. Next to them, a stack of foreign passports, neatly clipped together, like medical records filed away in a private clinic no one talks about. Most of the passports belong to women, all of them under 25. Their nationalities stretched from Eastern Europe to Southeast Asia, with a few from South America. The faces in the photos were full of life, now frozen memories sealed in cold, indifferent paper. She didn't say a word. She didn't scream, didn't call for help. She simply walked out of that house, her heart pounding in her chest. That night, she didn't sleep. And then she made a decision. Enough. She had been silent for far too long. She handed over everything she had found to the authorities. No demands, no lawyer, no negotiations, just the truth. And that truth made her the key witness in a federal investigation, one that had been quietly building for over a year, with Rick Harrison at the center. Until then, the FBI had only whispers, anonymous tips, a few vague emails, and rumors buried deep in dark online forums. No concrete proof, no one brave enough to step forward. But her testimony changed everything. The investigation accelerated overnight. Undercover agents were planted inside the pawn shop. Hidden cameras were installed. Listening devices were embedded in fake merchandise. Phone records were pulled, and financial transactions were examined down to the last penny. Rick wasn't just involved in shady business. He was orchestrating an elaborate human trafficking operation. His TV fame was the perfect disguise. The pawn shop was the front door. But behind it, a labyrinth of exploitation. And the victims? They walked in chasing dreams and disappeared without a trace. They were lured in with promises, modeling shoots, TV appearances, a shot at a better life. They were told they'd be discovered, just like the celebrities before them. But instead, they were cut off from their families, moved from place to place like cargo. Many of them were never seen again. No messages, no calls, no one came looking. They vanished as if they had never existed. And those secret rooms, like the one she had stepped into, were likely the last place they left a trace. In that darkness, Rick couldn't have run it all alone. Chumley, the name once tied to goofy antics on TV, wasn't as innocent as people thought. He recruited, he convinced, and sometimes he enforced, always staying just close enough to keep things running, but far enough to deny everything if it went south. But no one was buying the clueless act anymore. The woman, the one who uncovered it all, was the one variable the system hadn't prepared for. She was no longer an outsider. She became the only light in a room no one else dared to enter. Then came the fear. Not just of Rick, but of the things he used to say to her. That he had people in law enforcement. That certain politicians owed him favors. That he could make a problem disappear before it ever saw daylight. She used to think it was just ego talking, but now she knew better. It was a warning. She changed her number, moved out of state, added 3 extra locks to her doors. She stayed up most nights until 3 a.m., not just afraid of being killed, but of being erased. Afraid that one day she might be treated as if she had never existed. When the story finally broke, she was holed up in a cheap motel in Arizona, alone, holding the TV remote with shaking hands. Headlines ran non-stop. Rick Harrison arrested. Federal investigation uncovers shocking truth. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She just sat there and cried. Not out of relief, but out of sorrow. Sorrow for the girls who were never found. Sorrow for the people who believed in the bright, glossy lie of television. Her identity was sealed completely under court order. Even during the trial, her name was never spoken. Just a code, a pseudonym, a shadow. But everyone knew, without her, there would be no trial, no footage, no testimony, nothing. She was the key that opened the door to everything, the invisible witness that brought the truth to light. And though she's now under protection, she knows the price of speaking up never truly goes away. What drove her to speak up wasn't just what Rick had done. It was how proud he was of it. He bragged, he laughed, he pounded his chest about the things he'd hidden. He saw it all as an accomplishment, proof that he'd outsmarted the system. He didn't feel guilt. He felt triumph. And that's what haunted her the most. Because in that moment, she didn't see a con man anymore. She saw someone who truly believed he had the right to do harm and would never be caught. But now, he was caught. And she, the one who had once stayed silent, had made that happen. In her final testimony, she said one sentence, just one. But no one forgot it. It was quoted in hundreds of articles, documentaries, and press conferences. A sentence that silenced the courtroom the moment it was spoken. A sentence that shattered the illusion. A sentence she still hears in her dreams. He wasn't untouchable. I was just the first one brave enough to say it. Pawn Stars now seemed like a lie. What made Chumley's case particularly troubling was that he had hidden in plain sight. He played the fool, relying on the caricature, becoming the comic relief, and in doing so, disarmed everyone. He made them feel safe, but behind that goofy smile was someone who was believed to know far more than he ever revealed. A person who had used his innocence as a disguise. And when the charges were laid, when his entire role was revealed, the laughter was gone. He wasn't just a side character, he was central to a system built on silence and manipulation, and now that system was crumbling. The courtroom had witnessed and heard more than most could bear. Testimonies from survivors, emotional breakdowns, damning emails, and mysterious financial traces. But nothing shook the room more than what the federal investigators presented on day 12 of the trial. The evidence gathered from coordinated raids on Rick Harrison's property archives, digital servers, and Chumley's residences gave the jury their first horrifying and comprehensive glimpse into the infrastructure of deceit and exploitation that Rick and Chumley were accused of building. It all began with their digital file volume. The FBI's cyber forensic team had recovered several encrypted hard drives from a steel-reinforced safe hidden beneath the floorboards in Rick's private office at the pawn shop. The safe was found behind a false wall, locked tightly with a biometric lock. Initially, Rick refused to provide the access code during his arrest, but federal agents managed to break it open within 72 hours, using bypass hardware and known login samples. What they found inside was staggering. A directory labeled with seemingly harmless names like Backup Archive and Historical Footage,
turned out to be camouflaged archives containing extremely disturbing content. One directory, titled Docs Alt, contained scanned passports and personal identification documents belonging to over 40 women, many of whom used aliases. Some shared the same name but different identities, indicating they were part of a created identity chain. Each file was accompanied by many handwritten notes, and Rick's handwriting, later confirmed by analysts. These notes included phrases like cooperate, resist at night, need sedatives, and move to East House. Then came the video files. According to court officials, more than 600 individual video files were recovered. These were not show episodes or behind-the-scenes footage. These were surveillance recordings from inside several of Rick's private properties. The rooms had multiple hidden cameras, often aimed at the beds, bathrooms, and hallways. The videos varied in length, content, and dates, but the pattern was clear. Women, sometimes appearing distressed or drugged, were filmed without consent. Some were interviewed, coerced, or manipulated into explaining why they were there. Others were filmed while sleeping, crying, or trying to open locked doors. Only a few minutes of these tapes were shown in court, enough to confirm their existence. The judge ordered the rest to be sealed indefinitely. A federal agent who reviewed the content firsthand stated under oath, "This isn't just a recording. These are trophies. They captured them. They controlled them. They tracked compliance." Also discovered within the encrypted folders was a file titled Operational Rules.pdf. The document read like a procedural guide, listing instructions on recruitment, housing, and silencing the women. It referenced emotional leverage, advising how to conduct background checks on social media, and included chilling phrases like, "Make them believe they're special, then make them fear being abandoned." Elsewhere in the safe, there were 3 disposable phones, one of which contained a chain of messages between Rick and an international contact discussing logistics for transporting a girl from Eastern Europe, using terms like VIP client, clean record, and no trace of paperwork. The IP addresses linked to the phone's communication were traced back to unregistered locations in Macau and Istanbul. But the physical evidence was just as troubling. Inside one of Rick's luxurious homes outside the city, a 4-bedroom property registered under a shell company, agents discovered a basement room. From the outside, the house seemed ordinary, even with a pool and a well-maintained garden. But upon entering, investigators discovered discrepancies in the floor plan. Behind a locked door in the main closet, they descended into what looked like a panic room, except this room wasn't for hiding, it was for confinement. The walls were lined with soundproofing, metal rings were bolted into the concrete floor, and a security camera was mounted in each corner, connected to an on-site recording center in one corner of the room. A mattress lay on the floor with no bed frame, no personal items, just a plastic water bottle, an empty pill bottle, and cotton swabs. Later, a sample taken from the mattress tested positive for sedatives. Blood traces were also found, matching the profile of a woman who had testified on the 8th day of the trial. In the adjacent room, shelves were filled with clothing, all of it for women, all tagged, all arranged by size and labeled with the first letter of the name. Some of the outfits were identical, indicating uniformity or control over appearance. Other items found in the house included syringes, vials containing unidentified substances, later confirmed to be powerful sedatives, and a handwritten notebook documenting arrival dates and departure statuses, some marked with check marks, others with question marks. The prosecution presented everything in an orderly, methodical fashion. Photos, reports, diagrams, and sworn testimonies from agents who entered the scene. Then came the storage unit, located in a remote area outside of Las Vegas. This unit was registered under a company named Gold Grade Holdings, which was later traced back to Chumley. Inside, agents found backup drive boxes, old electronic devices, and several rough fabric bags filled with disposable phones. There were also thick stacks of documents containing printed materials, most of which detailed transactions not from the pawn shop, but from money transfers to obscure international destinations, Bitcoin wallets, gift card purchases, overseas wire transfers. One agent testified that the level of detail in the money laundering operation was on par with organized criminal syndicates. Then came the audio tapes from Chumley's house. Agents recovered a small digital recorder hidden inside a safe beneath the floorboards of his bedroom closet. It contained over 50 hours of private conversations between him and Rick, with topics ranging from business plans to fears about whistleblowers exposing them to Rick. In one recording, Rick said, "We'll be fine as long as no one says we've built a fortress." The arrogance in the recording was undeniable, but it wasn't just what they said, but how they said it, laughing comfortably as if they were discussing making a reservation at a restaurant, not a crime that had destroyed lives. Perhaps one of the most shocking pieces of evidence came from a fourth property, an industrial warehouse that Rick had purchased under an alias 5 years ago. This location wasn't listed on any official documents related to the pawn shop, and Cory, along with other employees, had no idea about it. Agents discovered a studio set up with professional lighting, backdrops, and filming equipment, all of which appeared in the video. A woman, nearly unconscious, was sitting on a stool, and Rick's voice was heard off-camera guiding her to read the lines. She stammered, looking visibly scared. Later, a family member identified her as someone who had been reported missing. She still has not been found. That video was never aired. It wasn't intended to be, not for content, but for domination. The courtroom fell silent as this was described. There were no questions, no challenges, no defenses, no cross-examinations. What was there? The evidence overwhelmed the recordings, the physical items. They painted a clear and disturbing picture. Rick Harrison and Austin Russell didn't just break the law, they shattered lives. They built a horrifying house behind the scenes of a pawn shop empire, and for a decade, no one knew, or worse, no one saw. And now, everything was laid bare. The illusion of innocence had vanished, leaving only the evidence and the echoes of the lives it had destroyed. It all started with a whisper, like most buried truths, a whispered comment made in the break room of a pawn shop that had become an international brand. The comment was simple, almost forgettable. They didn't film the real things, only to stage them. The person who said that was a humble man named Brent Maloney. For 6 years, Brent worked behind the scenes at Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, mostly managing inventory and handling high-value items that never appeared on TV. He wasn't glamorous, he didn't pose for photos on Instagram, and he was never in the spotlight. But Brent was always watching. And now, sitting before the federal jury as a key witness, Brent finally spoke. He wasn't emotional. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. His voice was calm, deliberate, heavy with the knowledge he had accumulated over the years. What he said in the next 2 hours didn't just confirm the prosecution's narrative. It gave it structure. Brent's testimony focused on one idea. The show was an illusion. The pawn shop was a stage, but the real work took place in the dark, outside the frame, after the cameras were off. Pawn Stars was the front. What you saw on TV was rehearsed, cleaned up. The items were sometimes real, sometimes inserted by producers, but the money, the real transactions,
That was something entirely different. According to Brent, Rick Harrison always focused on two things: control and secrecy. From day one, Rick emphasized two separate accounting systems, one for the shop's public face and one for operations. Only a few people had access to the second system. Brent was responsible for recording large, sensitive transactions, and he was one of them. He recalled dozens of instances where expensive items, such as antique weapons, foreign currency, and rare jewels, were never entered into the shop's main ledger. Instead, they were listed under coded entries like Special Item or Customer 11. These items were often temporarily stored in a locked room in the basement, then quietly removed a few days later. I once handled a 17th century ceremonial dagger worth over $80,000, Brent said. It was never aired, never seen by the public. It disappeared from the inventory in less than a week. When I asked Rick about it, he said, "VIP trade, stay away from it." But that was just the beginning. Brent stated that over the years, he noticed a pattern where some women would appear repeatedly but never as customers. They weren't there to buy or sell. They were never introduced to the other staff, most didn't speak much, and they always came through the back entrance, escorted by Chumley or a man Brent only knew as Kevin. They didn't seem like they wanted to be there. Brent said sometimes they looked scared, sometimes they cried, sometimes they wore clothes that didn't fit. I once tried to talk to one of them, and Chumley told me to mind my own business. Another moment that stuck in his memory. A young girl, barely out of her teens, stumbling down the hall one night after hours. She seemed clearly disoriented, and there were bruises on her wrists. Brent was alone, then spent hours trying to help her. Rick appeared from nowhere, placed his hand on Brent's shoulder and said, "You didn't see anything." He said it like a threat. Then, Brent began recording everything, not on the shop's computer, but things they were tracking. He kept a personal handwritten log stored in a locker in the nearby gym. He went there regularly, noting names, dates, license plate numbers, cash amounts. He wasn't sure why he wrote it all down. Maybe he didn't trust himself to remember. Maybe part of him hoped he would never need it. But he did. Years later, after the FBI raid, Brent was contacted by investigators. They asked if he wanted to talk. "I had been waiting for that call for a long time," he told the court. Brent handed over the journal. Investigators confirmed that many names and details matched entries found in Rick and Chumley's encrypted files. The vehicles Brent listed were linked to real estate websites used to traffic victims. The cash was connected to international money transfers, and one specific name was boldly written on a page, dated July 11th, 2020, matching a missing persons report that remained unsolved. Her name was Laya, and Brent said she had red hair. She looked terrified. "That was the last time I saw her," he told the court. He also spoke about another employee who had tried to speak out, a woman named Tanya who worked in accounting. She began asking too many questions about missing receipts and strange cost codes. She was fired within a week with no explanation, no severance. "I think she knew," Brent said, "but she was scared. We all were." He described the pawn shop as a controlled environment, where every movement was monitored, security cameras had access codes, and confidentiality agreements were mandatory. Rick didn't just control what people saw, but also controlled what they were allowed to question. When you worked there, you quickly learned what you were allowed to notice. Brent said that the job wasn't just about selling antiques, but also about silence and smiling. Even the film crew, which he claimed played a role, though many didn't realize it. Most were independent contractors brought in to shoot staged segments. They had no idea what was actually happening behind the scenes. Their job was to make everything look fun, light, and entertaining. They thought they were making a history show, Brent said, and on the surface, they were. But the history made behind the scenes was something no one wanted to watch. He continued to detail the systematic arrangement of fake business fronts, Rick's Chumley's candy store, even a series of short-term educational workshops on collecting every item. Brent accused these efforts of serving as a path for money laundering, victims of cash disruption, or distracting the public with shiny new content. The particularly chilling moment came when Brent described the monthly cleanup routine, which happened like clockwork. Rick would come and say, "Time for a refresh." That was the signal. Files would be deleted, items moved, hard drives replaced, cameras cleaned, locks changed. He believed these resets were done to erase digital traces or set up the scene for new operations. But perhaps the most impactful part of Brent's testimony came in his final statement. "I stayed silent because I was afraid. I saw people disappear. I saw the girls cry. I saw the truth buried under the reality TV show, and I let it happen." His voice broke for the first time. "I thought someone else would speak up. Someone with more power, someone less afraid. But no one did. So here I am." When Brent stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom remained silent. Even the judge seemed to pause before continuing. It wasn't just what Brent said, but how his story deeply connected all the details, from the girls coming through the back door to the cash that never appeared in the books. Brent's testimony exposed the machinery of a criminal empire disguised as a popular TV show. And for the first time, the term Pawn Stars took on a new, ominous meaning. Because according to Brent, and the mountain of evidence that followed, those women were treated like commodities, bought, sold, and exchanged, and the show was just the cover. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like and share it with your friends and family so they can explore it too. Leave a comment below to let us know your thoughts on the chilling revelations we've shared today. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more exciting stories and shocking revelations in the future. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next